Welcome back to Quintessence Virtual Retreat, Spiritual Journey. I am so pleased to be joined here with Liz Koch. She is a somatic educator and international author. And I'm just so pleased that you can join us in our discussion on how really reclaiming our spiritual connection to ourselves can change and uplift our lives. And I would love to just open this space together with just some breathing and grounding into our bodies and full awareness. And I'd just like to invite our participants to take a moment and set your own intention for our time together so that you're able to really extract, the nuggets of wisdom that would help you in your own personal life to move forward in a way that's appropriate for you. And I also want to thank you for showing up for this. When we invest our time in our spiritual connection, in really reclaiming our own essence, it actually inspires and sometimes provokes people around us to also question and kind of think about their lives from a different perspective. And so I just want to thank you for participating in this global planetary awakening that we're all experiencing. And with that, Liz, I would love for you to just share with us a bit about your work.
Well, thank you, Maggie. Thank you for inviting me. It's a delight to be here. I'm actually not in the therapeutic or healing world. So I kind of stand in a unique place as what is called a conceptual artist. So my interest isn't so much in healing, it's in creativity. How do we become the most creative? Where is our capacity for creativity? How do we source creativity? And through that, I became very interested in the sensory system because I realized my ability to show up here on Earth had to do with whether I could land, like really feel connected, locate, and really sense myself here and sense what the world is offering me by being here on Earth. So that's been my journey. And when I became curious how movement helps shape us and helps understand how it opens us into a more receptive state, I started studying with a man named Bob Cooley. And he was interested in the psoas at the time. It was a little window for him to really explore it. So when I entered in, we spent time in what's called constructive rest, on your back, knees up, feet on the floor, literally landing in our bones. Landing, just kind of the same thing you're suggesting when we pause and breathe. Something we're doing all the time, but we're actually paying attention to it. And that sense of myself entered into that world, and it made me realize that I was terrified. That I was in a room, even if it was in my own space, and I was on the floor and I was grounded, but I was experiencing fear. And I started to catch the fact that I wanted to jump up, I wanted to go do something. I had this response, and I became curious because when I looked around, at that time the phone wasn't next to you, it was in another room. And I think the phone's ringing, somebody's at the door, something's happening, and nothing was happening. And I started to realize that's my nervous system. And some part of me can observe my own nervous system. So who is that part of me? who is it who's a larger field of energy that I can actually be receptive to my own process, my own experiences. I can self-reflect, I can turn towards, I can be conscious of myself in its own expressions. And I found that fascinating. And that was why I entered into the world of SOAS and became basically an expert, so to speak, in the somatic world around this core tissue that I redefine not as a muscle, but a messenger. And in Taoist healing, it's called the messenger of the soul.
Whoa.
Wow.
That's like
Ta-da!
ta-da. Wow. And so we have arrived at the SOAS, the messenger of the soul. So, okay, I have to know more about this, Liz. Like, tell me, I know that tell people, first of all, who maybe don't have a physiology background, where is the psoas muscle? Just so we can.
Absolutely. So I'm going to reshape our idea of physiology, because for many of us, it's, if you did study anatomy or body, like, here's my nose, here's my ears, here's my lips, like we do as kids, naming parts of ourselves. The psoas is named a muscle, and it's basically grows out of your spine into your legs. So if you kind of right around your third chakra, or your center, what we call the will center in Chinese medicine, because your kidneys float on it and your adrenals float on it. So it's also kind of how we show up here is through our desire, our will, our longing. That goes at an angle over the ball and socket joints into the inner part of the femurs, or your leg bones. So it's a large, massive tissue. In my world, it doesn't function. The structural element of being so-called a muscle is something I think that's misunderstood. I think of it more like the tongue. It's an organ of perception, meaning the tongue is made up of what we would define as muscle tissue, but we don't think of it as a muscle. We do exercise it, so to speak, by using it, but we don't really, think of it as something we have to control, although some of us do. And we really hope it's a form of expression. So psoas is expressing something. It's a messenger. It's telling us, and I'll tell you what it's telling. It's telling us a lot about our nervous system and whether we actually can ground on the earth and show up here, or whether we're kind of hovering. We haven't quite landed.
And so for me, that brings up feelings of safety.
Yes, it's all about safety.
And that's a lot of the first and second chakra, right? Yes. The first chakra is a lot around feeling community, a sense of community, a sense of belonging.
Yes.
And then the second chakra kind of being more around like, am I safe to express who I am in the world? Am I safe to be creative, basically, right? Is it safe to create? Is it safe to show up? And so, how does this relate to how we show up in the world, our psoas muscle? Like, if it's constricted, so it gets constricted or very loose? Is that kind of its state of being?
No. That's why the paradigm, rather than anatomy, is embryology, because embryology tells the story of how we show up here. And I've had the privilege of sitting at Jaap van der Wal's kitchen table, and he's an international embryologist, a medical doctor, a professor. He taught anatomy for 10 years to Olympic athletes, but he came out of retirement to help us understand what a magical and spiritual journey it is to show up here. So as a scientist, as an embryologist, he's saying we are not made up of cells. We utilize cells to become. And
Mm-hmm.
so as we start the journey of longing and embedding into our mother's womb, which actually comes out of this own cellular matrix, we begin the journey of showing up. And we know through perinatal psychology that actually happens before conception. And
Mm-hmm.
that where our parents are in that dynamic of conception helps us understand or shapes us in certain ways. And every phase of our journey shapes us. But consciousness is pure, so to speak. It's like you're whole. And then you take this journey into landing on Earth, and you might feel very fragmented by the time you get here, but you actually can always access that wholeness. So that's part of the what's called perinatal, the journey, 40 years of research on how people actually remember being conceived, remember showing up here, remember being born, remember our birth story or in the womb. Not so much in a cognitive story, but in a sensory story. And so,
Yes.
yes, and there's enough research now that we hear the same stories. So there has been put validity on the idea that we are not made up of these parts. We are a whole being who's showing up. And yes, our journey here may be fragmented in some way. It may not have felt safe. It may not have given us the environment in which we could really come fully into being. And so that may be our story. It might even be thought of as our traumas, but behind that or within that or larger than that is this sense of wholeness that we can access. And that's the amazing thing about consciousness, because consciousness is beyond form. And so how our form shows up. So movement is part of the story of how we come into being, what shapes us, what are the things that shape us. Our mother, her journey, what she's experiencing. Our father, what his journey is, what he's experienced. So our ancestors become part of our story and theirs, and it goes on, right? It goes back into time. So,
Yeah.
so showing up here involves kind of a group process, so to speak. We're all helping us show up here. And then whether I feel safe or not is a really interesting story, because safety is not necessarily outside of ourselves, meaning, yes, we all agree certain things would be traumatizing or horrific or not what we would ask for. But the ability, what the SOAS is messaging is, am I safe or not safe? But more importantly, am I coherent or not coherent? And so if I can find coherency, which is often thought of as in the nervous system itself, then even if the surroundings are chaotic, I can be coherent in my own system, because each of us have an axis, and that axis is what the cells are shaping themselves around. So when the cell divides and multiplies, in that story of showing up here, there's a division. It's called enfolding and unfolding, and it's called the primitive streak. But there's this field that opens up. And this becomes you, but that field is your axis, and it's directly linked to the larger field of cosmic intelligence, or what I call biomorphic intelligence. All life is touched by this field. All life is shaped by this ebb and flow of fluid conversation with a larger field of fluid conversation, with a larger field of fluid conversation. And so when we have a large band, we actually are often picking up a larger field of information than if I have a very narrow band and I think of myself as an object and I don't feel connected to anything. I feel objectified or separate and so really a lot of this is not so much what this tissue is doing, but what the whole organism is doing. So now whether it's tight or loose or weak or short, I want to change the conversation. Your SOAS is telling you either that you're not weak, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
Which changes everything about what you want to do to not be weak when you're exhausted. When you're exhausted, you're not going to do more exercise to get more strong. You're going to rest more. And we also need to know that over time, the psoas can dry. They can shrink. And that's what shortness is. So stretching, pulling, pummeling, trying to get that tissue to do something. No, you're really looking at, how do I source nourishment? How do I rediscover this primal space, this axis? Well, how do I live very close to my own axis? Because that axis is connected to your mother's axis. She has her own, you have your own, but it's connected to Mother Earth's axis. And so you're heading out into the larger nourishment, the larger mother, the larger capacity to really be supported here on Earth so you can flourish, so you can be creative. So creativity is part of being nourished.
Yeah, and I would say that's in the feedback loop, because when you have creativity, you have fulfillment, and the fulfillment is the feedback loop, I would think, of the nourishment of that creativity. And so that's why sometimes for myself, I might think I'm tired, but if I am inspired to be creative, then I actually get more energy from that. And especially if it's something that's coming from like it's not like I need to do this thing, right? That to me won't do it. But if I'm like, ooh, I want to write about this, right? And I write about it, then it gives me that sense of fulfillment and that nourishment. And I love this idea of the dry being the tired, and this energy, because it really fits for me with a lot of Ayurveda that I've studied. And that, and this idea of, for example, we're just going to go there for a minute, Liz, because it's all in the same area. But like, for example, they do a lot of enemas or bastis. And in the US or in Western, people have really gotten into colonics. Mm-hmm. And actually, in the Vedic tradition, you wouldn't use water because the colon is an organ of air and space. It's a vata organ. So if you put water in there, water is actually drying. Mm-hmm. And so you actually want to put oil in your colon, because that's nourishing. And so I'm thinking about how when we nourish ourselves, it is that oily unctuousness that really gives life to our bodies,
I think one of the things I like, there's two things I really love about the Ayurvedic tradition. Is one, it's a constitutional system, which means when I'm working with someone, and I'm not a therapist, but when I'm educating them, I recognize that dryness comes in many levels. And so the working on all different levels in the constitutional realm is not that fix-it model, but that whole body, whole being nourishing. How do we nourish the system? I love the use of oils. I think it's both funny and fabulous that, every orifice of your body you put oils into, Yes. I've had my eyes done,
Me too. Yes.
Absolutely incredibly nourishing. Yes. Right? And the ears and so doing the head and doing the feet. And I encourage people to use good quality oils. I actually take in a lot of oils. And, mm-hmm. I grew up in the time where you were not supposed to eat oils. They were horrible for you. You're right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm a butter eater. I'm like a really high quality butter eater, an olive oil eater. I use sesame oils, like I use lard, really high quality. Like I love what oils do to my system. It's like the nourishment to the nervous system. It just takes your nervous system and just, allows the neurology, like a root system, to just keep expanding and growing and getting that good connection, conductivity that we're looking for. Yes. Yeah. So I agree. And those are the kind of behaviors or lifestyles that can support your psoas. Having somebody manipulate your psoas is like poking the caterpillar.
Yeah.
poke a caterpillar and it will curl. And if you poke the very core of a human organism, it will have reactions. And one of them is to curl, as well as to ward off. So we have primal gestures that are part of our living organism. So when somebody's trying to fix you, you're going to go into a certain reaction, whether you're conscious of it or not. And you might have to bypass what your instincts are, which might be to push the person away, say, ouch, no, get away. Because you're going to then go kind of cortexual. You're going to like basically disassociate so you can be work done. And I tell my people who do massage and therapy, I say, is that really what you want for the client? Don't you want them to be more present in themselves? You know, so therefore, how do you draw them out? How do you feel? How do you help them feel safer? Is not by poking the caterpillar. You poke the caterpillar forever, it doesn't make a healthier caterpillar. And what they'll say is, oh, but it does something. And I say, yes, because when you get some kind of body work, one of the ways to know whether it's really doing what you're suggesting, which is this absorption, this nourishment, this inspiration, is whether you keep it opening in some way. Like you keep, I mean, you may curl in again and need more rest, but you keep this ebb and flow of expression. And if you don't, then you say, because what I'll say is, how long did it last? And they might say, oh, well, yeah, right. Oh, whatever had happened lasted maybe a week or 2 weeks, but it didn't really change the situation. It made me feel better for an hour, 2 hours, maybe a day, it took the pain away. And then, but it all came back. That's recapitulation in a loop, like you're talking about in the negative way, where you keep returning to the same issue because there's not enough nourishment for the system to move out of that dynamic. And that's where the constitutional work is so subtle but important to the cells, is how are we really nourishing ourselves? And that's a lifestyle, that's a nutritional, that's a movements, that's a time to play, time to go into unstructured play, which is kind of that impulse that you speak to, you know, like, oh, I'm really curious about that. You cannot be curious if you're in a sympathetic fight or flight response. But if you have some parasympathetic, you have some nourishment in you, you can start to play and you go, oh, I really like that. Or you smell the flower, or you know, see its beauty. You start interacting with life in a way that if you're just getting from here to there, you're bypassing. And our culture is very sympathetic. It's in a fight or flight mode right now. And so we have to create that for ourselves. You know, we have to tap into ways of nourishing ourselves.
I think that in this spiritual journey that we're all on, that this self-nourishment is almost a prerequisite to, you know, an embodiment, is this like prerequisite to really embarking on our spiritual journey. So well, like
it starts it, right? Because this is like this, the question is, what is going, you know, why am I here? You know, but you're right. And one of the things I can say to that is that to the kind of level of spiritual journey you're talking about, that is a form of connection, belonging, expansion, as well as being able to move deeply within myself. I've never seen it separate from the physicality of my being. For me, I came here to show up. I came here to really land and locate and be here and experience this. And I don't know exactly why, but I know that I'm here for myself, for my purpose, for whatever. And that means I have to take very good care of this. And I don't see it as a vehicle. I see it as actually the access, the portal of becoming the elemental, you know, really actually being here. And so I've never seen it as just a portal or a vehicle or it's actually, this is it. This is it. It's how do we bring consciousness into the elements, where the elements know, I know, you know, that I am made of air and water. And, you know, and the gut is an interesting thing you brought up, because, you know, the gut we used to think of cleaning it out like a septic system or a plumbing system. But now we know that the gut flourishes with all its bacteria and all its nourishment. So when even if you're doing a cleanse, or you're doing something that's helping the organism to restore through an illness, you're still looking at ways that how do you kind of create the best flora, the best really, you are an ecosystem. You are an ecosystem. You're not a separate organism. So your journey is everybody's journey, so to speak. It can't really be separated.
Exactly.
You have more bacterial cells and fungi cells and all these creatures that live within and are you than you have human cells. So then you got to, ask the bigger question. Oh, we're all on this journey together. The whole cosmos is on this journey together,
I love this, because then it's like when I show up for whatever my part of this grand orchestra is, right? Then it's like each instrument together, we've signed on to this like collective story that we're all showing up. And so if one of us is kind of like offline, so to speak, like shut down, but I also want to say so depleted that we can't really show up and play, that we can't show up. We're so depleted. We can't be available to, because there's a level of chaos that you have to be able to dance with, to really live from a spiritual perspective. I'm just going to be bold and say that. Like, you have to kind of surrender this prefrontal cortex and really go into a more whole brain thinking pattern, so that you can access the limbic brain, all your full brain capacity. And I'm going to say your entire spinal cord, all your little dendrites, right? Because all of them are actually taking in information from the universe all of the time.
Yeah.
And so the inspiration is in every part of our being. So when we are able to nourish our bodies like that, then it's like our bodies can be a messenger, for our spirit. That's how I see it. Like my brain, which I actually see it as my heart, in Chinese, they say your hara, so your psoas, kind of, right? This center, your dantian, is where your energy is really coming into your body all of the time, is my understanding. Like that's like where it's kind of coming in, the center of the vortex.
That is the umbilicus. That is where we start to show up here. So it is a moving center, but the heart, the longing, the oscillation of the heart goes 16 feet beyond our physical body. And this is HeartMath, who's researched the heart for years and taking it out of the idea of a pump and understanding as an oscillator. So it's the largest oscillator. So you could say the heart is really about how you show up here, and the heart is how we communicate with the larger field of it, right? So we have this, I have the capacity to show up and blossom fully, like any plant or tree, right? The more rooted I am, the more I can really speak my truth. I can be bold. I can have the audacity to show up as me, okay? And so that's that field of me. And so is always talking about your axis, boom. But the heart then takes it out into how I interface with you and how all life is sentient beings. So, the trees are living and talking to me, and the birds are, and if the rocks speak, and all of a sudden we're in a spiritual field of many organisms that we've defined as organisms are all orchestrated in that. And we don't all have to play at the same time, but there is a harmonic field of energy, right, that we're feeling into, that is allowing, and we don't really understand, I don't understand there's stories around that, why we're here, why, what we're, but I really don't have a story about that. I just have the experience of participating. So I start participating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's so joyful that it's like, oh, wow,
Yes.
this is fun.
Yes.
This is play.
Yes. And I think from there, two things. One is then I think of my mind is more just an organizer. It just kind of organizes all the impulses and gives me some ideas sometimes,
Right.
And then I love this idea when we're in that place that we're gathering sensory information from everything around us, from this, we were talking about biomorphic fields, right? And so I have my biomorphic field, and then all the plants have their biomorphic field, and then the planet has its biomorphic field, right? And even I believe like my kidneys would have its own biomorphic field, right, of intelligence. And so I'm going to propose that when we tune into like the biomorphic field of the planet, that for me is a huge source of nourishment.
Yes.
And it is my, when I'm going to commence this call, I am going to go walk in the forest, because that often for me is a greater regenerator than even food. Like I am way more nourished by a walk in the forest than I am by, consuming sustenance, because it balances my nervous system. I get all this information from the trees and the birds and the ocean and the dirt, the smell of the petrichor of the earth, right? And then it's like all of that is nourishing to my senses.
And literally to your organism, like that absorption of the oil, the absorption of the fragrance, or of the all the information that's there, literally on your hands, allowing yourself to feel the earth. I tell people to put their belly to the earth, to hug a tree, because the earth is a co-regulator. And when we understand that we're a mammal, so the animal body is what SOAS speaks to. Okay, it's really about our paws, which we think of as feet, landing and feeling not only on the earth, but the earth speaking to us through that. So then we start to feel like, oh, you're picking up a much broader band of information, and that is the sourcing we're talking about that's so nourishing. That's beyond putting something in my mouth, which of course nourishment is important, but there's this way in which I'm being nourished. And I would say that it's not only pleasure, it's eros. So the whole capacity to flourish is to be in relationship to this erotic sense of life, like life is blossoming, life is falling in, like this is the time of dissolving and dying and returning. But where are we returning to? We're returning to the earth, in which that allows for the restorative gestures to show up. So when we see a lot of our behavior as gesture, it helps us understand to follow that's your biointelligence that says it's getting dark and there's less light, and my impulse is to curl up and rest more.
Yeah.
And those rhythms that the rhythms that you feel in nature is that sustenance that's so essential to restorative gestures that bring us back into life. It's not the go, 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 like I have to keep expanding, expanding, expanding. It's the allowing the system to go deep within itself again. And then it will unfold again. And then it'll go deep inside. So many of us don't have rhythm, maybe because of our own upbringing. The cultural story is to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and keep going no matter what. So we have a lot of chaos, because we also have a lot of chaos in the field, right?
Yes.
And I find the work with the heart so amazing, because that is the center of coherency. If we can go into the heart field and feel the really the love, the gratitude that we did get to show up here, that we have really arrived here, and we're arriving every day more and more in our life, like we can really show up more and more. That field affects not only me and my health, but you and your health and the health of the planet. And they've actually measured that when people go into this heart center and really feel love and gratitude, it literally changes the Earth's electromagnetic field. That we're a larger enough organism, all of us as a species, that we can actually support what's going on everywhere else. And so we're really in a growth spurt, you could say, of reshaping who we are and what we are here on the Earth.
I love this. I'm thinking too of how when we are in a state where we are feeling incoherent within ourselves, right, which is in that kind of depleted state.
Yes.
I'm thinking about how we go into nature and then nature is holding that coherence, and we can then resonate back to our coherence through being in that biomorphic field of the Earth's coherence, you know, and consciously allowing it in, right? Because I do think that's part of it. I mean, it will happen regardless, but if you allow a receptivity to it, you know, like you can walk. One day I was walking through the forest with my daughter, and I was just spinning about something in my mind, and I was like aware enough where I was like, I want to be here with her, and I could not get out of my head, you know, like for the life of me. And so I finally was like, what can I do? And I had my phone with me. So I was like, I'm going to play like Hertz, you know, the Hertz frequency. I'm going to play some Hertz music while I'm in the forest. And within like 4 or 5 minutes, I could feel that my mind could finally relax. Mm-hmm. And so I'm bringing that up because it's like, we do need to have an awareness. The awareness like exponentializes the effect, I think.
Yes. It's why I call my work core awareness. I'm actually more interested in the awareness because the awareness is a game changer. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's not that I have to, you know, be regulated all the time, or, you know, I don't have to be on all the time. It's that I have to actually turn towards myself. And that's what I was saying with the story of noticing as a young woman that I was terrified, even though I was in a physically safe environment. And then I had knowledge that that was my system, not somebody, what they did or said to me or what happened. It wasn't outside, it was actually me. But I was even more curious the fact that I could watch me. I could actually have the awareness that I was incoherent. I didn't have a word for it at that time. I recognized it as some fear response, but I didn't know what it was. But I all of a sudden went, oh my God, I can actually recognize that. Well, who's recognizing me? That's that awareness, that's that consciousness that I can turn towards my story, my experience. And actually, what it is so interesting is that it's actually pre-nervous system. And for people who study or explore the fluid system of the body, you know, we're a fluid organism. And so you could say that morphic field is also a fluid vibrational field. And all life is shaped by fluid. That's what living is a fluid. We're fluid. And even if we're dry and craggy, we're still a fluid organism. So in that, kind of like the fish in the water, all of a sudden, you know, the fish becomes aware that there is water, like they're actually swimming in water. We actually most of the time don't know what we're swimming in. But when we can begin to feel that energy around us and that fluid within us, that fluid carries information that does just what you're saying nature does. It comes to us as a way of starting to regulate. And for people who are trying to heal, it's in that fluid system where your pre-nervous system is, meaning that you were fluid before you were formed.
Yes.
So I do a lot of what are called primal fluid movement. So, say you're in the city and nature feels very far away, right? And there's a lot going on. I've worked with people who say, there's so much electromagnetic field here. I have to do a lot of constant regulating because I don't have those trees and the ocean and the earth to smell. And, and so I say, go out. One woman says, I take a train and go out to a garden every week and just spend time I picked out a particular tree I really resonate with, and I spend time with her, and I just sit under that tree and I feel its vibration field and I regulate with this. For others, it's also getting on the floor and doing some movement that is not exercise or fitness, but is allowing your own system. So an example would be waking up in the morning. When I begin to wake up and I begin to come into this, consciousness or this awareness from my dream state, one of the things I play with is just rolling to my side and curling my spine a little bit in what's called the primitive C, or, like the fetal position, but just softly rounding your spine, and just rock a little bit, or just stay there and be quiet and just breathe. Just notice your breath. You're going to be breathing, but notice your breath. And in that, be aware of allowing yourself to unfold out of that, like a blossoming of a flower. And so you're unfolding for the day rather than just getting up and kind of, getting to the bathroom or wherever you're going. But let yourself consciously unfold. I think you'll find it changes the way you show up in the day.
I love this. And I would love for you to share with us just a little bit about your book, Stalking the Wild SOAS, and embodying core intelligence, and what you feel inspired to share with us around this and the connection to the spiritual journey.
Well, it's probably my most spiritual book in terms of, I wrote the SOAS book many, many years ago in the 80s, and it was talking about understanding SOAS in a different way and what I had learned from my own body. So I wasn't looking at it as the outside in, but from the inside out. And then Core Awareness is a book that was about taking some of these concepts and developing them with awareness, so that when we're doing movement, that it enhances if we're conscious, if we're paying attention to our sensory system, if we're noticing how we feel. We're not just trying to get the job done. We don't take our bodies into the car mechanic and pick it up later. We're actually engaging in a process. But we all understand we're not body as object, but body as process. And then I've written some other things, but the next book became one I wrote in 2019. It was birthed in 2019. That is Stalking Wild SOAS, because I realized that part of what you were talking about is returning to nature is a rewilding. It's taking us out of this mechanistic world and remembering that we are, in fact, a biological creature, and that isn't spirituality in religion has often negated that. And I think that spirituality in today has to be inclusive of it, because the physicists and the biologists are becoming our spiritual teachers now, because they're talking, instead of a mystical field, they call it a morphic field, but it's the same field, right? So we don't have to be separate from our spirituality to our biology. They're actually the same magic is happening. And so it's essay form, which you could read any essay, but it was about it. The book came into being through dreaming. And I don't mean sleep dreaming. I mean becoming receptive to allowing something to move through me and speak through me. And as I did that, I spent a month not on, the phone or the internet or, reading something, but really following my own impulses and that creativity you're saying that goes, oh, and then writing that down. And knowing that my cortex could organize those words, that I could communicate with you, but it wasn't coming from a thinking process. It was coming through me. And I was then able to, which is why cortex is a really great thing, able to organize it in a way that I could then express it and share it with other people. And so this is a way of interfacing between those, how life is spiritual, and spirituality is life. And it's kind of like, you know, I'm not a physical organism having a spiritual experience. I'm a spiritual organism having a physical experience. I am all of that, you know. And so that's what the book is speaking to.
Gorgeous. Thank you so much for this time together, Liz. And thank you for just going so deep, you know, deep into our bodies and our psoas and our, you know, nourishment and all of these things that really allow us to have a full, you know, a full spectrum experience with our life, right?
Yeah.
And I would love to just kind of ground this into our bodies again with some breaths, and then, you know, send it out as a bit of a prayer to all those who will hear us and all of those who will only get the morphic vibrations.
Yeah. And so the heart, you know, when you're just feeling the wonderful wave of your breath.
Yes.
It has its own ebb and flow.
Yes.
And to me, the long exhale is one of the places that allows my breath to not be something I control or manipulate or think I'm, you know, having to control, but that literally you can be breathed by the soul. And
Yes.
the heart, to me, has a slightly different pulse. And so you can also sense while you're breathing the pulse of your heart. And that's where that love, that gratitude, that ability to just be present to what is in your life right this moment can really start to shift your field of awareness.
Gorgeous. Let's do it.
Do it.
And I'd like to close by saying, may all beings everywhere be happy and free. And may our thoughts, words, and actions contribute to the happiness and freedom of all beings everywhere. And thank you again, Liz. Thanks for this time together.
Thank you very much for having me.